everybody, today I'm going to be talking about hitchhiking along the Appalachian Trail as a thru hiker. You don't absolutely have to hitchhike to get from trail to town and town to trail as a thru hiker, and there are some towns that the AT passes through directly. However, for the most part, you are at least a few miles between the trailhead and the town, so it's usually much more convenient to find a hitch than to walk all that way to town. For women, this can be especially intimidating because obviously it is not something that we're used to doing for the most part. Hitchhiking used to be a traditional part of life in the United States. A lot of people did it about 40 years ago, especially when they were young, but now it's kind of died out, especially due to safety concerns. And as a woman going into the AT and never really having hitched that much before, I knew that hitching generally is a pretty safe practice, but I wasn't very comfortable with it, and I thought that it would be good to give my perspective on what it was like for YouTube. Joe Brewer has a great video on hitching as well after his AT thru hike, which I highly recommend that you watch if you are interested, because I found it very useful before I left for my hike to watch his video. My first piece of advice is never to hitchhike alone. I think that this is pertinent to everyone, as it's just safer to hitchhike with a group. But for women especially, I think that it provides a nice feeling of comfort that you might not experience if you are all alone hitchhiking. So I really do recommend finding someone else to hitchhike with in a buddy system, at least one other person, and probably 2 to 3, depending on the size of your group. If it gets much bigger than 3 people, your group will probably have to split up, because you have to have a small enough group that you'll be able to fit in one car, which means that you're going to have like groups of about 3 to 4 max. And 2 is a pretty nice number because people can pick you up even if their car only has room for 2 people. So for men, I think that it's also an advantage because you will get picked up faster hitching in a group than hitching alone. People are less likely to think you're a scary loner type if you're in a group, even with other men, than if you're hitching alone. But especially if you're in a mixed gender group, you're going to get picked up faster just because people feel safer picking you up a lot of the time. My advice for when you get to the actual hitchhiking location and you're trying to decide how to configure your hitching, if you're in a group with women, definitely have the women stand in front and maybe put their hair down. I found that I got picked up faster if I was wearing a dress than if I was wearing athletic shorts, but either way, the women should definitely be in the front and the men can kind of hang back a little, because just the women being more visible, people are going to stop faster. It's a fact of life, even though maybe it's a little sexist. I should qualify that I don't mean that you should hide and the woman just be the only person who's visible. I think that everyone should be visible who is going to be riding with you, so that the driver knows who exactly they're taking and they can make a decision on whether they want to pick you up or not. But I do think that if the woman's in front and is the one with her thumb out or holding the hiker to trail, hiker to town bandana that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, that you'll be at an advantage in terms of the speed at which you'll be picked up. I think it does seem a little deceptive to be hiding in the woods or whatever and then just come out when the ride comes. So, but you can hang back. When you're getting ready to hitch, I recommend that you take off your hat and sunglasses so that your face is completely visible to passing drivers. This will make the human connection between you and them easier to make, and you're probably more likely to get picked up a little faster. You should be looking at the drivers of the cars that are passing and trying to make eye contact while you're standing where you're standing. In terms of locations to choose, I recommend picking a place where you are off to the side of the road with a wide enough shoulder or distance between you and the road to be safe from oncoming traffic. So definitely don't obstruct the roadway. It's also very advisable that you pick a place where there's a turnout or a parking lot or something where the driver can pull over and pick you up easily, so that they are able to easily get to you. Otherwise, it's going to be inconvenient for them. They're probably less likely to stop to pick you up. When you're standing on the road and waiting for a ride to come, I also recommend that you smile and try to look happy while doing that. That's probably more likely to make people stop for you if you're smiling at them and you look friendly, rather than mean mugging them if they aren't immediately going to pull over. So definitely keep that in mind. I also recommend that you consider getting a hiker to trail, hiker to town bandana. Joe Brewer had one in one of his videos about hitchhiking, and I got one and I thought that it was very helpful just in terms of comfort. It's not that you can't survive without just putting your thumb out, because you definitely can, but with the hiker to trail, hiker to town thing, it makes it really clear that you're a hiker, and it also avoids the annoyance of having people give you the thumbs up who aren't stopping for you. A lot of the times this happens in towns where people don't want to pick you up, and maybe they don't realize that you're hitchhiking, but I think they do usually realize it. They're just giving you the thumbs up just for fun. So I also found that it was more comfortable just to hold the sign than to be holding my thumb up for an extended period of time. Another thing that I recommend when you're on the side of the road as a hiker is to keep your backpack visible but not on you. I personally just, when I was at the road, I didn't want to have my pack on because it was uncomfortable, and so I kept it off, but I kept it in clear sight. And also keep your trekking poles visible. That'll make it clear that you are a hiker and not a vagrant or someone else just coincidentally hitchhiking. And a lot of the people along the AT who are driving these roads know exactly what you're doing and know what the AT is. And many of them have personal connections to the trail. It's a super popular trail, so they'll be happy to stop for you pretty quickly, especially in the South. There are a couple things that will make hitching considerably harder for you, so just keep these things in mind. The first is if you are hiking with a dog, because a lot of people just, even though they like dogs, they don't want to pick up a dog and have the dog in their car and getting the car all dirty. Some people will be happy to stop for a dog, but it'll probably take you longer if you or someone in your group that you're hitching with does have a dog. So that's something to keep in mind as a factor in your AT hike and whether you want to bring a pet. Another thing is that rain can make it harder to find a ride, in my experience. I know that I met some people who said that rain made it easier, they got picked up right away, but in my experience, when you're out there in the rain and everything is soaked and your gear is soaked, people are a little hesitant to pick you up because they don't want to be having someone who's soaking wet getting their car interior all completely wet. So in those situations, your best bet is probably going to be pickup trucks if you're really wet, or maybe just camping for the night and waiting it out. There is one state on the AT where hitchhiking is completely illegal, which is New Jersey, and people talk about the codes in New York being not especially friendly to thru hikers, although I did not have any trouble in New York. So there are places where you're really not supposed to be hitching legally, and in those situations, or in situations where you need to get to town quickly, or you're just having trouble through the traditional method of standing on the side of the road, and you want to get to town, I recommend, if you're in an area where there's day hikers and people coming back from their hikes, approach them when they're out of their cars and ask them if they can give you a ride to town. And a lot of the times, because they're out of their cars, it humanizes you to them, so they're more likely to help you. And also, if you are in a town, you can always mention inside a store or a gas station or something that you're looking for a ride, and a lot of times someone will volunteer to take you. So being in your car, it gives you an insulation from the outside world, and when you see hitchhikers while you're in your car, you're probably less likely to form a personal connection with them and then be willing to pick them up than if you are approached by someone who is pretty clearly a hiker who's looking for a ride. So I do recommend that. That was effective in my experience. I used it in the Smokies when I sprained my ankle, and I wanted to get to Gatlinburg to take a few rest days. I found that it was really helpful because that area is notorious for being a hard hitch, and I think Gatlinburg wasn't especially close to there, so it was a little bit of a drive, but by approaching people and asking and talking through the situation with them, I was able to find a hitch within 10 or 15 minutes. I tried to avoid hitching whenever I could just because I don't like hitching that much, and I did it out of basically necessity and convenience when I had to, but I avoided it when I could, and I did this through calling in advance to any hostel or hotel that I was staying at and asking if they offered rides, and a surprising number of them do pick you up from the trailhead and bring you into the town. So you can often find, especially hostels, places that are willing to bring you to the trail and from the trail. And it's very convenient, and you have a guaranteed ride, so that was always my preferred method when I could do it. Many hotels and hostels also do have a charge of a few dollars to $30 to pick you up, so always ask about any fees, and if they do have a fee, you can probably just hitch because it'll save you some money. But even if you're hitching, I do recommend carrying some cash and always offering to pay for either like food when you get to your destination if you're going into town and stopping at a convenience store or something, or just giving them some gas money. Most of the time people will not take you up on it, but once in a while they may, and it's always nice to be gracious because they are doing you a big favor and you appreciate it, and you want to show them that so that they'll continue to pick up hikers in the future. One thing that surprised me about my time on the AT was the amount of times I was picked up by women. I would say at least about half my rides were women, and sometimes they were people you wouldn't expect. I got picked up once with my hiking partner with two 16-year-old or 17-year-old girls who were just in town in Vermont for the weekend, and they rode in separate cars, so we were separated, each with one of them, and that was a really fun experience. Also, I got picked up by a woman who went out of her way and drove up a mountain so that we could get back to the trail when it was a little further away, and we ended up buying her an ice cream cone because she did go out of her way and she had something else that she needed to do. So, and I ended up getting her a little lost, so I felt a little bad about that, but it ended up being a good experience as well. So especially if you're a woman or you're in a group with women, you're likely to be surprised at the percentage of women who are willing or happy to pick you up. A lot of the times your best bet for a hitch will be a pickup truck. I don't think I rode in the backs of as many pickup trucks as some people do on the trail, maybe partly because I was picked up by women a lot, but there did seem to be quite a few people, and especially larger groups of hikers tend to get picked up better by pickup trucks. And there were definitely times where both my rides into and out of town were pickup trucks. And so a lot of the times you'll be riding in the bed of the pickup, so expect a bit of a bumpy ride and be ready to stabilize yourself. I think that one good thing to keep in mind, especially when you're riding in the back of pickups, is you always have to have your pack like in your line of vision if at all possible when you're hitchhiking, because I have heard stories of people getting robbed, like somebody gets out first before they put their pack down while they're getting out, and then the person takes off with their stuff in the back of the pickup. And so I do recommend maybe putting your pack on the ground before you really get out, or one of you getting out and then the other person passing them down the pack. I guess that makes the most sense. The other nice thing about pickup trucks is when you're in the car hitching with people, when you've been out in the woods for 5 days and you smell really bad, like this happens sometimes when, especially early in the season when it had rained and my gear got wet, and not only was it sweaty but it had gotten damp, so it was like really dirty, that I was in the car with people who clearly had showered the same day, and I just felt really bad for them because they picked up these hikers and now they probably have this story about how stinky hikers are, and they're not rolling down the windows, or they are rolling down the windows, so that can be a little awkward at times. I mean, they know who they're picking up, but it's still a little awkward. So when you are in the situation where you're riding in the bed of a pickup, a nice thing about that is that you don't have to feel awkward about the fact that you stink because you're out in the open air. And it can also be a pretty novel experience to ride in the back of the pickup, although it's not my favorite, but it is probably your most reliable ride. So when you see a pickup go by, definitely make active eye contact and look enthusiastic. If someone who is offering to pick you up for a hitch ever gives you a bad vibe, always trust your gut and do not get in the car with them. Make up some excuse or just say no thank you if they make you uncomfortable, because our snap judgments of people are often more accurate than we give ourselves credit for. I had one unfortunate experience with hitchhiking on the AT where some creepy men pulled over and then were clearly drunk and were trying to get my hiking partner his hand into the car, and they reached out and shook his hand, and then they pulled him up close to the car and were talking to them. And I think it was because they thought that it was just women, it wasn't a man, so they were trying to be a little creepy. And so they went one way and then they turned around and like were going the other way, and it was just a little uncomfortable. So I would recommend standing back from anyone who's approaching you in a car and talking through a little distance, maybe like a foot, and not getting too close until you at least have the ability to make a few second decision about the person, because as I said, your judgments are more accurate than you think, and you should definitely always trust your gut, especially with hitchhiking. By and large, my hitchhiking experiences were positive, and I think that hitching along the trail is generally a pretty safe practice. I don't think that you need to worry, whether you're a woman or a man, too much about safety beyond taking common sense measures to protect yourself. So you don't have to freak out, and your mom may be a little scared about it, but I think that you don't have to worry too much. As far as hitchhiking stories besides the ones that I shared, there's not too much exciting hitchhiking that I did. There was one other person who seemed to be kind of hinting that he wanted to use drugs with us, or he kept saying, I like to party, and it was a little strange because he was someone who was older, and I didn't really know if he was, what his situation was or why he kept mentioning partying. He said he liked to pick up hikers, so I assumed that it was like he was looking for weed or something, but I'm not really sure. And it wasn't that bad. Otherwise, really nothing very scary. So if you have any exciting hitchhiking stories, I'd love to read your stories about hitchhiking on the trail below. Please leave a comment. I just want to give a shout out to Krista Leonard, who made the handkerchief that I am holding in the thumbnail for this video. We appreciate it very much, and thank you so much, because it was really helpful in getting hitches along the way. I hope this video was helpful in assuaging your fears about hitchhiking on the trail, and that you are able to take away some tips for maximizing your experience hitchhiking while on the AT. And let me know if you have any other suggestions for video topics. I always have some more up my sleeve, so I've thought of a few that I want to do soon but haven't gotten around to yet, and I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. Happy trails.